within like the bigger world of publishing, comics is still looked at as like a genre.
Right.
You know, and it's not a genre. Like last night, those 5 books were all in different genres. You know what I mean? But none of those comics are. The only good thing you could say about them is that maybe they come from like an artistic sort of honest point of view. You know, but they're all different. You know, comics are getting to this point now where it's like people have to start honing in on like the genre within the comic that they're interested in within the comics. You know, whereas 10, 20 years ago it was like, okay, if it's mature, that goes into one category. If it's stupid, it goes in another, you know? So, I don't know. It's kind of like we're cinema, like if you read film criticism in the early 60s or in the 50s, that's kind of like where comics are. Like where people like,
Not art yet.
yeah, like a really bad book will get a great review in the Washington Post or in the New York Times because they don't even have a criteria. The veneer of smartness and smartness are still looked at as the same in comics. You know, it's like it's fine, but it's an interesting thing. It really reminds me of where cinema is at. It probably like where books were when Dickens was serializing,
Yeah.
where it was looked at as like, oh my God, what a joke.
Not yet.
You know?
Yeah.
Poor Sailor was inspired by a Guy de Maupassant story called At Sea. And that might be one of the first things drawn in there. And that book basically covers the last 8 or 9 years of just doing short stories and trying different things. So it's probably, I don't know how obvious it is in the reading of the book, but for me making that stuff, it was, each one was its own sort of response to the previous story. You know, like doing one type of thing and then wanting to do something, you know, maybe radically different or something that at least was radically different in my mind. So that after doing Poor Sailor, which is like sort of keeping everything very, almost treating it like memory, where it's just these really vignette, small moments. They're not even like characters. It's trying to really like work within a framework of like a fairy tale or a fable, and then doing Somersaulting where I worked out of order and it was just these really particular concrete like moments that don't necessarily build into a whole, and if they do, it's almost just like a cluster of things that work well together. In an interesting way it has, because you start thinking about the cultural context. You know, like the whole thing with Family is that you can get like a mad paperback, you know, of jokes, and that's next to, you know, a George Simenon book, and that's next to a Gary Panter comic, and it's this weird jumble of high and low, what they call high and low culture. And so you start thinking about like what's the context where all this stuff makes sense, and you're creating a context for stuff to make sense. As an editor with Kramer's Ergot, you're constantly thinking about like, how do I throw in this work with this work and this thing, and they all seem very, you know, all over the place, but you're bringing them together in a way that hopefully feels cohesive and in a way that's where the whole is better than the parts, you know, like a great anthology or a great magazine. And Family's taught me a lot about that, you know? Context is everything. It's weird, but that's how you realize that like context is everything.